The lock clicked at exactly 6 a.m. That sound. It used to mean my son was home from work. It used to mean safety, but that morning, it meant something else entirely. A deep chill ran down my spine as I walked slowly to the door, wiping my hands on the apron I hadn't even taken off from the night before. I barely slept. My bones ached from scrubbing floors, and I had one more shift ahead, just like every other day for the last 20 years. When I opened the door, 3 officers stood in front of me. One held a folder. The other kept his hand near his belt, where his weapon rested. But the third, the youngest one, he looked at me with something that was not hate, not pity. It was something colder. "Rosa Maria Martinez?" he asked. I nodded. "This is a federal order for your detainment by immigration enforcement." My fingers were trembling before I even touched the paper. But the moment I looked at it, the moment my eyes reached the signature line, everything around me disappeared. There, in black ink, was the name of the person who reported me. Pedro, my son. The name I had whispered every night when I got home late and found him asleep on the couch with the TV still on. The name I screamed in the hospital the day he was born, alone, because his father had disappeared before he even took his first breath. The name I called with pride when I attended his high school graduation, hidden in the back row, afraid someone would ask me for ID. That same name was now on a form that would tear my life apart. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My tears had dried out a long time ago, the same way my hands had from years of bleach and ammonia. I stood frozen as the officers walked in, looked around, and began speaking into their radios like I was already gone. One of them said I had 10 minutes to collect my things. I remember grabbing my rosary, a small photo of Pedro when he was 5, and my work shoes. That's all. That was my life. The neighbors peeked through their blinds, the ones whose homes I cleaned every Tuesday, the same ones who hugged me every Christmas and said I was like family. None of them opened their doors. As I stepped out, one of the officers asked me if I had any pets. I told him no. Pedro used to have a dog, Luna, but when he left for college, she stayed behind. She died 2 years later. He never asked about her. He didn't even notice. The officer nodded and shut the door behind us. Just like that, I was no longer in my home. The drive to the detention center felt like falling down an endless hole. My mind kept flashing back to the beginning, to the day I arrived in this country with a bag full of hope and a heart full of fear. I came here when Pedro was just a toddler, left him with my mother in Oaxaca, told him I would come back soon. But I never did. I couldn't. Not once I realized how much he needed, how much I had to give up just to survive. I worked every job you can imagine, cleaning hotels, washing dishes, taking care of strangers' children, while mine asked about me through phone calls. Every paycheck I sent was like a bandage I used to cover the guilt I felt for leaving him. Every dollar was a promise that one day we would have something, that one day he would understand. And when he turned 16, I brought him here. It was the happiest moment of my life. I worked triple shifts to pay for the lawyer, lied about how I got the money, cleaned up after parties where kids like him trashed homes I would never afford. But it was worth it. I used to stare at him while he slept, just like when he was a baby, and think, this is it. I did it. He will never have to suffer the way I did. But I was wrong, because suffering isn't just poverty, it's betrayal. And betrayal from your own child doesn't scream. It whispers. It builds slowly. It starts with silence during dinner, with rolled eyes when you speak Spanish in public, with words like, "I'm not like you," or "you wouldn't understand." It starts when the child you raised begins to see you not as a mother, but as a burden. And I kept working. I told myself he was just stressed, that college changes people, that life in America was harder for young men, that he still loved me. But the truth? He was watching me the whole time, watching me work myself to death, watching me hold on to a house that had his name on the title, but my blood in the walls, watching me stay quiet when people insulted me, when I was underpaid, when others called me just a maid. And while I dreamed of one day giving him the keys to this house with pride, he was dreaming of taking it before I could. He didn't ask me to leave. He didn't confront me. He called immigration. And now here I was, sitting in a cold metal chair, in a room filled with faces that looked like mine. Mothers, workers, survivors, women who crossed borders with babies in their arms and ended up here with handcuffs around their wrists. I asked the officer one thing, just one. Did he say why? He looked at me for a moment, then down at the folder. No, he replied. But he submitted documents about property ownership. He mentioned your name was still on the lease, said it was a mistake. A mistake. 20 years of cleaning floors, of sleeping on couches, of sending money back home so he could eat, was now a mistake. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you gave everything to, if you've ever felt the sting of love twisted into a weapon, tell me your story in the comments. Type, "My voice matters," and let the world know that we are more than numbers, more than workers, more than ghosts in someone else's dream. And if you believe that these stories need to be told, that our voices deserve to be heard, subscribe to this channel. Because what I'm about to share with you is not just my story. It is the story of thousands of mothers like me, and we are done staying silent. My name is Rosa Maria Martinez. I am 58 years old, and for the past 20 years, I have been a house cleaner in Bakersfield, California. Most people pass me by without ever knowing my name. They know the scent of lemon polish I leave behind, the folded towels in their bathrooms, the streak-free mirrors that reflect their perfect lives. But me, I am invisible, a ghost in their homes, a whisper behind their comfort. I came to this country with nothing but a picture of my son, folded in my shirt like a shield. Pedro was 5. I left him behind with my mother in Oaxaca and promised I would return soon. But soon turned into months. Months turned into years. And years became decades of silence, sacrifice, and aching hope. When I arrived in California, I didn't speak English. I didn't know anyone. I slept on the floor of a cousin's apartment for 3 months, sharing space with 6 other women. We took turns using the mattress. One night hers, one night mine. That's how we survived. My first job was cleaning bathrooms in a motel off Highway 99. The smell of bleach clung to my hair so strongly that I had to cut it short. My fingers bled during winter from the harsh chemicals. I learned quickly not to complain, not to ask questions, just to smile and say thank you. Because in America, if you are undocumented, silence is your currency. I remember saving my first $500. It took me almost 6 weeks. I sent it to my mother with a note that simply said, "Para Pedro's shoes and school books." She later told me he slept with that note under his pillow for a week. When I finally managed to bring Pedro to live with me, he was 16. I had missed everything. His first day of school, his broken arm from falling off a bike, his voice changing, his first heartbreak. I tried to make up for lost time, but there are some gaps you cannot fill with hugs or money. We moved into a small house in East Bakersfield, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, mold on the ceilings, and a cracked kitchen tile that cut my foot more times than I can remember. But to me, it was a palace. I painted the walls myself, hung curtains I found at a thrift store, and I told Pedro, "This is ours. No one can take it away." The truth is, I bought that house with blood. Every paycheck I earned cleaning other people's messes went into it. I remember one night, after cleaning a mansion in the hills, I walked home with my shoes soaked from their garden sprinkler. I passed by my own house and just stood there, staring at it like it was made of gold. I wasn't just cleaning floors. I was building a future, laying bricks with every mop, every scrub, every backbreaking shift. I didn't care that I never had vacations, that I missed weddings, that I ate the same rice and beans for dinner 6 days a week. All I wanted was for Pedro to grow up without shame, without fear, with dignity. And for a while, it seemed to be working. He made friends, got good grades, played soccer. I even took a night class in English so I could understand his teachers better. I practiced pronouncing words like opportunity and achievement, words I had never imagined for myself but clung to for him. One day, I came home from work and found a letter from his school on the table. He had been accepted into a college prep program. I cried so hard that night, I soaked the couch cushion. He hugged me and said, "You see, Mama, your work is paying off, but life has a cruel way of twisting blessings into weapons." Because what I didn't see coming was how fast the world around him would change, how the pride I built into our little home would turn into embarrassment once he stepped into a different circle. He started pulling away, asked me not to pick him up from school in my cleaning uniform, said it was complicated to explain our situation to his friends. At first, I ignored it. I told myself all teenagers go through that phase. But then he stopped speaking Spanish at home, started correcting my pronunciation in English, refused to invite friends over. One night, he came home late, and when I asked where he had been, he rolled his eyes and said, "You wouldn't get it." It was like watching a seed I had planted grow into a tree I could no longer climb. But I kept working. I kept believing. Every Saturday, I cleaned 5 houses. I saved every extra dollar to help with his college fund. I never told him how many times I went to sleep hungry, how I used expired bus passes or borrowed cleaning supplies just to save pennies. I remember the day I finished paying off the house. It was cloudy. My hands were shaking as I held the receipt. I looked around the living room with its second-hand furniture and chipped coffee table and whispered, "We did it, Pedro. It's finally ours." He didn't say much that day, just nodded. I thought he was overwhelmed, maybe proud, but now I see he was already planning his next move. He knew the house was paid. He knew my name was on the deed, and he knew I had no papers, no protection, no voice. That's the part that breaks me the most. Not that he betrayed me, but that he calculated it. That while I was still cooking his favorite meals, still washing his clothes, still praying over his photo every morning, he was filing paperwork to erase me. I've learned something about love. It's not always loud. It's not always beautiful. Sometimes love is just showing up. It's silent suffering. It's years of cleaning toilets so your child can sit in a classroom without shame. But the world doesn't reward that kind of love. It doesn't write songs about it. It forgets it exists. And sometimes, so do our children. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, ever given your all to someone only to be erased, I want you to know, you are not alone. Comment below with, "I have value," if this story speaks to you. And if you want more stories like mine, subscribe to this channel. Because behind every clean floor and silent sacrifice, there is a voice waiting to be heard. And today, mine will be. Pedro used to say I was his hero. He said it with pride when he was a child. He would look at me after a long day and tell me that one day he would be rich and buy me a house, one where I would never have to clean again. He promised he would take care of me like I took care of him. Sometimes, he would even say it in front of others, puffing up his chest like he was announcing something grand. I was his mother. I was his pride. Back then, every little thing I did was magic to him. I remember once when he was 8, he came home crying because a boy at school called him poor. I made him his favorite meal that night, arroz con pollo, and told him, "We may not have much, mijo, but we have love, and love feeds the soul." He looked at me and said, "When I grow up, I'll be rich, but I'll still eat your food every day." But children grow, and sometimes they grow away. The first cracks started to show when he turned 17. He began spending more time outside, more time on his phone, more time with people I didn't know. He asked for name-brand shoes and clothes that I couldn't afford. I still found ways to get them. I took on extra shifts, walked to more houses, cleaned until my hands felt like sandpaper. I wanted him to fit in. I wanted him to belong. I started noticing he didn't like speaking Spanish around his friends. I would call him mi amor or mi cielo in public, and he'd flinch. Once in a grocery store, I asked him something in Spanish, and he hissed at me to speak English. I laughed it off, said he was just embarrassed. But deep down, it hurt. He stopped calling me mama, started calling me just mom. Not in a loving way. It sounded more like a stranger testing out a word. By the time he got into college, he was already drifting. He chose a university just 2 hours away, but I rarely saw him. He visited less and less. When he did come home, he barely spoke. He acted like a guest, not like a son returning to the house built on my knees. One time, I tried to talk to him about his classes. I was so proud. I wanted to hear about what he was learning, about his dreams. But he cut me off, said, "You wouldn't understand. You didn't even finish school." He said it without even looking up from his phone. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the little drawing he made when he was in kindergarten. It was a picture of me holding a mop and him holding a book, and it said, "My mama is a superhero." I kept it in a drawer near my socks, where I hid all the things that reminded me I had once been enough. As he advanced in school, something in him hardened. He started to speak like the people I cleaned for. He spoke about politics, about the economy, about how the system was broken. But when I tried to join the conversation, he would roll his eyes. He began correcting the way I pronounced things in English, told me I needed to keep up if I was going to live in this country. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I had kept up, that I had run a race every day of my life just to keep food on the table, that I had learned enough English to defend him when teachers tried to label him, that I had walked through fire just to get him here. But I stayed silent because mothers learn to swallow pain like air, because my love for him was louder than my pride. Then one day, something changed. I overheard him on the phone. He was talking to someone about legal protection and clean titles. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed It was something for school or a job application. But then he started avoiding my calls. He would take longer to respond to messages. He stopped calling me to say goodnight. It felt like I was disappearing from his life in real time. And the worst part was, I let it happen. I told myself this was normal, that he was becoming independent, that this was the dream. He was American now. He was free. But freedom should never come at the cost of your roots. And he was cutting me out, root by root. One evening, I saw a document on the kitchen table. It was open, half covered by his laptop. It had my name on it. At the top, it said, "Transfer of property request." My heart stopped. I asked him what it was. He barely looked at me and said, "It's just something I'm checking into. Don't worry about it." But I did worry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and counted the years I had worked, the years I had saved, the years I had waited for a thank you that never came. He left. Early the next morning, didn't say goodbye. A few days later, he came back with an envelope. Inside was a letter, a warning. He said he had spoken to a lawyer, that my name on the house was a liability, that if I got caught, the government could seize the property, that it would be safer to put everything under his name. I laughed. At first, I thought it was a joke. I asked him if he was serious. He said yes, that it was for our protection, as if I hadn't spent 2 decades protecting him, as if I didn't know the truth behind those calm, cold words. He was preparing to erase me, legally, quietly, permanently. That night I cried, but not like before. This time it wasn't sadness, it was something sharper, like betrayal had carved a space in my chest and taken up residence. I realized then that the boy who once held my hand crossing the street was gone. In his place was a man shaped by a world that told him power was everything, and that his mother's sacrifice was just a stepping stone. If you've ever felt someone you love turn their back on you, if you've given everything and still felt like nothing, share your story in the comments with the words, "I gave my all." Your voice matters, and if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to this channel, because too many of us love in silence, and it's time we start being heard. It started with a small pain in my lower back. At first, I ignored it. Pain was nothing new. It came with the job. I had spent years lifting buckets of water, dragging vacuums up narrow staircases, kneeling for hours on hard tile floors. Pain was part of the routine. I used to say that my bones were older than my age, and my hands had lived 3 lives already. But this time, it was different. One afternoon, while cleaning a large house on the edge of town, I bent down to scrub the base of a toilet, and something in my hip cracked. A cold heat shot through my leg, and I collapsed. I couldn't move. My arms trembled as I tried to get up. My vision blurred. I lay on that bathroom floor, surrounded by expensive towels and lavender-scented candles, and felt like a discarded rag. I managed to call the homeowner, who dialed 911. At the hospital, they told me I had a hairline fracture in my hip. Nothing life-threatening, but I would need rest, at least 6 weeks off my feet. No walking, no working, no lifting, 6 weeks. For most people, 6 weeks off work is an inconvenience. For someone like me, it's a sentence. I had no savings. My emergency fund had gone toward Pedro's college fees last semester. I had no insurance, no workers' compensation, no legal protections. I was undocumented. I was disposable. They sent me home with crutches and a prescription for painkillers I couldn't afford. I spent the first few nights lying on the couch because climbing into bed was too painful. Every time I shifted, I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. I counted ceiling tiles to distract myself from the humiliation. Pedro visited once. He brought groceries and left them on the kitchen counter. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't sit down. He just said, "Let me know if you need anything," like a neighbor, not a son. I told him I was scared. He nodded and said, "Well, this is why people need to plan better. You can't just assume things will always work out." I wanted to ask him where he thought all the planning had gone. Into what hole had 20 years of work, saving, surviving disappeared? I wanted to remind him that I had given up birthdays, holidays, and sleep so he could have options, so he could speak the way he did now, with the confidence of someone who had never missed a meal. But I didn't say any of that. I thanked him for the groceries. After that, the house fell silent. I tried to keep myself busy with small things, folding clothes, wiping counters, watering the plants. But every movement was slow. Every step felt like it cost me a piece of myself. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the stillness. For the first time in years, I had nothing to do. No jobs, no clients, no lists. The silence screamed at me. It told me how replaceable I was, how easily the world moves on without you. And in that silence, a new fear crept in. What if Pedro didn't want me to recover? What if, deep down, this was convenient for him? One morning, I overheard him talking on the phone again. He was in the living room, and I was resting in the hallway, half asleep. He said, "She can't really take care of herself anymore. It's risky. I don't know if it's safe for her to stay here like this, especially without papers. If something happens and she ends up in the system, it could affect everything." I held my breath. He was talking about me like I was a stranger, a liability, something that could ruin his life. That night, he came to me and sat down. He looked serious, like he had rehearsed something. He said, "Mom, we should talk about the future." I nodded, unsure of where this was going. He continued, "This house, it's under your name, right? But if immigration ever gets involved, they can take it. You don't have status. That makes it vulnerable. Maybe we should think about putting it in my name, just to be safe." I stared at him, waiting for a punchline. There was none. He was serious. I asked him, "Are you saying this because you're worried about me, or because you're worried about yourself?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Both." That word hit me like a brick. Both. He was worried that his mother, the woman who gave up everything so he could wear sneakers that cost more than my weekly groceries, was now a threat to his security. I told him I needed to think. That night, I cried so hard my body shook. Not from pain, but from realization. He saw me as a risk, not a person. He saw the house not as our home, but as an asset. The next day, I tried calling a woman I used to work for, a kind lady who once said she would help me if I ever needed it. She didn't pick up. I called again the next day. Still nothing. I realized I was alone, completely alone. Later that week, Pedro came home with more papers. I didn't even ask what they were. I already knew. Legal forms, transfer requests, authorization clauses. He said, "We can go over them when you feel better. But the sooner we handle this, the better. I don't want to be in a situation where ICE shows up and we're unprepared." I asked him, "Are you expecting them to show up?" He shrugged. It was in that moment I knew. Something was happening behind my back. Something he wasn't telling me. I felt my chest tighten. My breath grew shallow. I was trapped in my own home, unable to move, unable to run, and now I was being cornered like an animal. My son, my Pedro, the boy who used to bring me flowers made of paper and glue, was now strategizing my disappearance. If you've ever felt powerless in your own home, if someone you love has made you feel like a burden, please share your voice in the comments with the words, "I deserve respect." And if you believe stories like this should be heard, subscribe to this channel. Every voice matters, especially those that have been silenced for too long. It was late afternoon when Pedro stood in the doorway of my room and said the words that still echo inside me, like a wound that refuses to close. "Mom, you are illegal. That could be dangerous for me." He said it so casually, so calculated, as if he had rehearsed it, in front of a mirror. As if my status, my existence was now something that needed to be managed. Not loved, not protected, just handled. I stared at him from my bed, my legs still wrapped from the fall, my body aching, and I wondered if he even saw me anymore, or if I had already become a ghost to him, something inconvenient, something to be erased quietly. He leaned against the doorframe like he was giving a business pitch. He explained that he had spoken to someone, a lawyer, maybe a professor, he never said exactly, who advised him to secure his future. He said things like liability and exposure and personal risk. But all I heard was this: "You are no longer my mother. You are a problem." I remember my lips trembling. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought he might hear it, but he just kept talking. He said the house should probably be in his name only, that if something happened to me, it would be easier to manage, that he could protect it. He said, "We can't afford to be sentimental about this. We." He kept saying we, as if we were still on the same side, as if he hadn't already started building a future without me in it. I asked him what he meant by "something happens." He shrugged and looked away. "I mean, you know, if immigration ever knocks on the door, I just want to be prepared." Prepared. I had spent 2 decades preparing his meals, his school clothes, his future. I had been preparing since the day I boarded that bus to cross the border, heart in my throat, terrified but determined. I had prepared for a life of silence, of invisibility, of sacrifice. But I had never prepared for this, for betrayal. Later that night, I sat in the kitchen holding a cup of chamomile tea, I couldn't drink. My hand was shaking. I looked around the house. Every corner, every wall had my fingerprints on it. I remembered repainting the hallway myself with a roller I borrowed from a neighbor. I remembered sewing the kitchen curtains by hand using old bed sheets. I remembered scrubbing every inch of this floor while Pedro studied for his finals, asking me questions about American history I never learned in school. And now he was rewriting our history. The next morning, I noticed some papers on the counter. Legal forms, property transfer documents. I didn't touch them. Just seeing them there, open and waiting, made me feel like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. I called my friend Julia. She was the only person I trusted. We used to work together, cleaning houses. She had gotten her papers a few years ago through her daughter's marriage. She listened to me cry, and then she said something I'll never forget. Mija, that boy doesn't see you as a mother anymore. He sees you as a threat to his comfort. Her words burned because they were true. That week, I noticed Pedro becoming colder, more distant. He stopped asking if I needed anything. He started spending nights away from home. And when he was there, he would speak to me with a tone that felt like a landlord talking to a tenant who was behind on rent. One day, I asked him if he would help me pay for my physical therapy. The pain in my leg had worsened, and I needed a few sessions to be able to walk properly again. He didn't even look up from his phone. He said, "You didn't plan, Mom. Now you want me to fix everything?" I felt my face burn with shame. That night, I found an old envelope hidden in my closet. Inside were pictures of him from when he was a baby, his first shoes, a lock of hair from his first haircut, a birthday card he made for me when he was 7, with a stick figure holding a broom and a heart. I clutched that card like it could still protect me. But the boy who made it no longer existed. A few days later, Julia called again. She sounded worried. She told me that someone she knew had seen Pedro at an immigration lawyer's office. I froze. She said she wasn't sure what it meant, but something didn't feel right. That's when it hit me. He was setting the stage. He wasn't just thinking about taking the house. He was thinking about taking me out of the picture completely. Not physically, not with violence, but legally, quietly, with paperwork and cold signatures and calls to people who would see me not as a human being, but as a case file. I started watching him more closely, the way he avoided my eyes, the way he locked his bedroom door when he used to leave it open, the way he suddenly knew things about real estate and taxes and legal loopholes. I had taught him how to write his name. Now he was using it to sign me away. I tried talking to him one more time. I asked him to sit with me. I made him his favorite meal, arroz con leche, the way my mother used to make it. He sat down, reluctantly. I asked him, "Pedro, do you love me?" He paused, looked confused. "Of course I do." "Then why do you treat me like I'm the enemy?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "I just want to protect what we've built." But there was no we. We was gone. And in its place, there was only me and him. And the space between us that used to be filled with trust, now heavy with silence and fear. If you have ever looked someone in the eyes and realized they no longer see you, if you've ever felt like love turned into paperwork, please share your truth in the comments with the words, "I deserve loyalty." And if you believe these stories must be heard, please subscribe. Your support is a light for those still living in the shadows. The knock on the door came just before sunrise. 3 short knocks, firm, no hesitation. I was already awake. The pain in my leg kept me from sleeping much those days, and the silence of the early morning had become my only peace. I was sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, staring at the soft glow outside the window. When I heard it, my hands froze. My heart thudded hard enough that I felt it in my throat. I opened the door, slowly. 2 immigration officers stood there. One held a file. The other asked for my name. I nodded, too stunned to speak. The one with the file opened it, flipped a few pages, and said, "We received a report. You are listed as an undocumented individual residing at this property." He didn't say it with anger. He didn't raise his voice, but there was no softness in his tone either. Just procedure. Just another name on another line. My knees went weak. My first instinct was to look past them, as if Pedro would appear. As if he'd say it was a mistake, that he didn't mean it, that he could fix this, but he didn't come. The officer handed me the document. It was official. A notification of possible removal proceedings. A review of my case would follow. They were not detaining me immediately, they said, only advising that the investigation had been triggered. I stared at the paper in disbelief. My name was spelled correctly, my birth date, my address, and then, at the bottom of the complaint, under initiating party, there was a name, Pedro Martinez. I felt the earth shift beneath me. The letters blurred. I read them again and again. My own son had written me into the system I had spent my whole life hiding from. I stood frozen, my hands shaking, the officers already turning back toward their vehicle. The door slowly creaked closed behind me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't a mistake. He had done it. He had turned me in. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. My coffee went cold in my lap. The papers lay beside me, heavy and silent, like a tombstone. My thoughts raced. Why would he do this? What had I missed? What could make a son betray his own mother so deeply, so intentionally? It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment action. It wasn't a mistake. This had required effort. He had contacted someone, explained my status, gave them my location, gave them the truth I had hidden for decades. He had weaponized my trust. He knew everything, where I kept my documents, what jobs I had worked, how long I had lived in the shadows. He knew the risks, and still, he did it. It was calculated. I thought about the forms on the counter, the way he kept mentioning legal protections, the coldness in his voice when he said he was worried about his future. The warning signs had been there, but I refused to believe them. I told myself he was stressed, that he was scared, that he would never do something so cruel. But he did. I tried, calling him. Once, twice, no answer. That afternoon, I heard the front door open. I sat perfectly still, the papers still clutched in my hand. Pedro walked in, his backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in his ears. He didn't even glance at me. He went straight to his room. I followed him. He was lying on the bed scrolling through his phone when I asked, "Why?" He looked up, startled. "Why what?" I held the paper up. He didn't deny it. He didn't ask what it was. He just sighed and said, "I did what I had to do." Those words gutted me. I asked him if he understood what he had done, that he had opened a door that could end with me being taken away, that I could be deported, imprisoned, sent back to a place I had not seen in 20 years. He said nothing. I asked him how he could do that to me, after everything. After the nights I spent walking home so he could have a bus pass. After the days I skipped meals so he could eat more. After the years I lived afraid so he could live free. Still, silence. I pressed harder. I begged for an answer, for a shred of guilt, for a flicker of the boy I raised. Finally, he looked me in the eye and said, "You weren't supposed to stay this long. I thought you'd go back one day." Those words hit me harder than any slap. He thought I would leave. He thought I was temporary. He never saw this house as mine, never saw this country as mine, never saw me as a part of his future. I was just a phase, a stepping stone. He stood up, walked past me, and said, "I'm sorry, but I need to think about my life now." The door closed behind him, and I was alone again. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about the thousands of women like me, the ones who scrub floors and raise children who speak English better than they do, the ones who build homes they are never allowed to own, the ones who pour their hearts into their children, only to become a footnote in their American dreams. We are the shadows behind their diplomas, the silence behind their victories, the ghosts they only remember when convenient. I looked around the room and saw all the memories I had built, every dish, every pillow, every photograph on the wall. They were pieces of me, and now none of it was safe, because the person I trusted most had handed me over. If you are watching this, and you have ever been betrayed by someone you raised, by someone you loved without limits, please write in the comments, "I trusted too deeply." And if this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel. These stories deserve to be heard. They are not just stories, they are our truths. It was one of those mornings when the light seemed softer, almost forgiving, but the truth lying ahead was unforgiving. I walked into the living room and noticed the envelope perched on our kitchen table. Its edge curved upward as if breathing quietly, waiting. My name floated on top of the stack of documents. Mine. I touched the paper and remembered each drop of sweat, each ache in my hands, every single paycheck I ever saved to afford that little house. But the paper in my hand wasn't a celebration. It was surrender. I picked up the document and read it again. Title transfer request. My name on the deed. His name listed as the new owner. A signature line already filled in. The realization struck me like cold water. I didn't own that house anymore. Or perhaps I never really had. The house I built with my elbows and prayers, the walls I repainted. While he studied for finals, the floor I scrubbed until my knees gave out. It slipped from beneath me. While I was down with a broken hip, he quietly moved the title. I remember when I bought the house, walking up to the mortgage broker's office and signing in Spanish with my shaky English. I had no idea what half the terms meant, but I believed in the future we were making. According to research, immigrants face steep barriers to home ownership: legal status, limited access to financing, lack of credit history. But I didn't let that stop me. I gathered every wasted lunch break, every extra job shift, every cent I could spare. I didn't care that buying the house would leave me without savings for emergencies. I believed we were safe inside those four walls. Yet here I was, clutching the transfer notice, trying to square the pieces of my life and his life and finding a chasm between them. He had used a power of attorney I signed years ago before I even realized its full weight. I had trusted him. He had used it. A switch flipped silently, invisible, inside the legal framework that promised protection but delivered betrayal. I walked room to room, fingertips brushing the wallpaper I chose, the photographs we placed. First his school picture, then our family snapshot in front of the old car I drove when I first arrived. I paused at the kitchen sink. I remembered scrub baths after he came home with scrapes from playing soccer, my voice saying, "You'll be fine, wash up and eat." I touched the cabinet door and the paint chipped away, just like trust had chipped away in bits until nothing remained sturdy. Then I found it, a half-hidden folder beneath the sink. It contained the original deed, my signature in shaky ink, and another document with his name printed bold. I flipped through and saw bank statements, down payment receipt, property tax forms. Everything linked to me, my years of labor, my identity behind this home. Then I saw the new paperwork: name change, transfer, agreement, his acknowledgement of legal responsibility. The slam wasn't physical. It was the quiet click of destiny shifting under my feet. In the hallway mirror, I saw an older woman looking back at me. Lines of pain, exhaustion, pride. I recognized her as the one who carried two lives, her past in Mexico, her present in America. I asked myself, was all this worth it? Did I build a future so he could dismantle it? The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, the same boards I installed used from a discount warehouse. The light through the window cast long shadows. I realized that what I built wasn't just a home, it was a promise, and the promise was broken. When I confronted him, he looked calm. He said, "It's just paperwork, Mom. I'm protecting you." His voice was even. No anger, no guilt, but the claim of protection felt like a sentence. He didn't ask for my opinion. He just told me. I asked, "You mean you filed the transfer already?" He nodded. I asked, "You're doing this while I'm hurt and can't move?" He said, "Yes." I tried to tell him what it cost me. He said, "You don't understand how risky this is." Risk? I understood risk. Crossing the border, working without papers, cleaning floors, living with fear. I was no stranger to it. But his risk wasn't mine. His risk was profit, while mine was survival. And now he held the title. While I held memories and a stack of papers that said I was no longer the owner. While I had no voice in decisions about the house I still lived in. While I was simultaneously resident and refugee in my own home. I looked through the window at the backyard, the little garden I planted from leftover seedlings when the owner before us moved out. The roses blossomed twice a year. I knelt down and dug a finger into the soil. It was dry. I had forgotten to water it because I was busy fighting. But how do you fight something you don't know is happening? How do you confront someone you raised? The next day, I sat in the living room with a neighbor. She asked how I was. I forced a smile. Made coffee with the last beans in the jar. She said she heard the change at the county office. I nodded. We sat in silence. She squeezed my hand. She didn't need to say more. I realized that owning a house meant more than the deed. It meant dignity. It meant a stake in a community. Historically, home ownership has been a pathway to stability for immigrants. But when legal status is unstable, the house becomes a paradox, proof of success and vulnerability too. For me, it was proof of years of work. Now it was a risk. And the risk wasn't financial anymore. It was emotional, the loss of identity, the feeling that you're being erased from the story you wrote with your own sweat. If you've ever worked so hard to build something only to have someone else claim it, share your truth. Comment below with the words, "I built it with my hands." And if you believe that the stories of silent labor deserve a voice, please subscribe, because no home should be built on silence. The silence between us became permanent. It wasn't the kind that happens during an argument, the kind that begs for resolution. No, this silence was different. It was colder, deeper. It had roots. It was the kind of silence that grows when love has rotted, when words are no longer bridges but walls. I started locking my door at night, not because I feared he would hurt me physically, but because I no longer trusted what he was capable of in the quiet. Trust, once broken by betrayal, does not simply return with time. It recoils, it studies, it watches the same hands that once held yours now sign away your future with a pen that doesn't shake. I began receiving letters, official letters, immigration updates, property reassignments, notices from the county. The mailbox that once held birthday cards and coupons was now delivering cold confirmations that my life had shifted without my consent. I called Julia again. My voice cracked before I could even explain. She said, "Come over." Her house smelled of cinnamon and hope. She made tea and listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. When I finished, she said something so simple it split me open. "Mija, you don't need to stay there. A house is not a home if it doesn't hold your heart." That night, I cried into her pillow like a child. I cried for the version of me that had believed in unconditional love, for the mother who believed that sacrifice guaranteed loyalty, for the woman who worked in silence so her son could speak loudly and freely. The next morning, she helped me gather some of my things. Not all, just a bag, a few clothes, important papers, a photograph of my parents, and the drawing Pedro made when he was 5, the one where he called me his hero. I folded it gently, even though the edges were already torn. I left while he was at work. No note, no explanation. I didn't owe one. The bus ride to Julia's was quiet. I stared out the window at the same streets I had walked for years. Each one held a memory. The bus stop where I waited with Pedro in the rain. The store where I once bought him a cake with the last cash I had. The park where he learned to ride a bike and shouted, "Look, Mom, I'm flying." Now I was disappearing from the story we wrote together. At Julia's, the couch became my bed. Her daughter gave me a blanket. Her husband offered to help me look into legal options. It wasn't luxury, but it was safe. It was honest. Days passed, then weeks. Pedro didn't call. Part of me hoped he would, even just to ask where I went, even just to be angry. But he didn't, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. I began volunteering at the church nearby, helping with food distribution, sweeping the halls, holding hands with women who cried silently as they waited for bread and prayer. I felt something shift inside me. I felt useful, seen, not just needed, but valued. One woman, Maria, told me she lost her son to the streets, drugs, gangs, prison. She held my hand and said, "Sometimes the children we raise become strangers because the world steals their soul." Another woman, Luce, shared how her daughter married rich and never looked back. She says she's too busy, but I think she's just ashamed of me. Their stories didn't heal me, but they reminded me I wasn't alone. This pain wasn't mine alone to carry. It belonged to all of us who had given everything, only to become invisible. I began writing down my story, not just for me, but for others, for the women in the shadows, for the mothers who crossed deserts and borders and fears just to give their children a chance, for the women who work behind closed doors and disappear from their own homes. I wrote at night, by the window. The street lamp outside, flickering like it too, was tired, but holding on. One morning, I went to the county office. I asked to see the property records. They confirmed what I already knew. The house was no longer mine. My name had been removed, the title fully transferred. Final, irrevocable, clean, legal. And yet, I stood there, flesh and bone, memory and sacrifice, breathing proof that nothing about that house was clean. I walked out into the sunlight and felt the warmth on my skin. I had no deed, but I still had dignity. If you have ever been erased from something you helped build, if your love was turned into silence, if you gave your soul and were paid back with a door slammed shut, please share your voice in the comments with the words, "I still matter." And if you want more stories that speak what others won't say, subscribe to this channel. Your support is the heartbeat of those still waiting to be seen. Healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't knock on your door holding flowers or apologies. It tiptoes in slowly, like sunlight through a cracked curtain, warming parts of you you thought would stay frozen forever. At first, I didn't even notice it. I was too busy surviving, too busy pretending I was okay. But healing was happening, quietly, in the background. It started with routine, waking up at Julia's, folding my blanket, helping prepare breakfast. It wasn't my kitchen, not my walls, but there was kindness in the way her daughter passed me the salt, in the way Julia set a plate for me without asking. That kindness was medicine. I began volunteering more, at the food bank, at the church, at the community center where mothers gathered to share stories, braid each other's hair, and speak the names of their children like prayers. One afternoon, I sat beside an old woman who reminded me of my own mother. Her hands were wrinkled, strong, the kind of hands that had seen too much. She told me she hadn't seen her son in 10 years, that he left after she couldn't pay his bail. She said he blamed her, that he never forgave her. She smiled softly and said, "Sometimes we give them everything and they still choose the world." I didn't respond. I just reached for her hand. That touch reminded me I was still human, because that's the worst part of betrayal. It's not just the loss, it's the erasure, the way you begin to doubt your own memories, the way you question if your love was ever real, if your sacrifices even mattered. But that day, surrounded by women who carried the same invisible scars, I realized something. We are not erased. We are written in silence, in strength, in survival. I started walking more. My legs still hurt sometimes, but movement helped. I passed by homes I used to clean. One, in particular, caught my eye, a 2-story with white shutters and a rose garden. I had spent 2 years there every Tuesday morning, scrubbing the same kitchen floor while the owner watched TV. She used to talk to me like I was deaf or dumb. I remembered how she once said, "You people really know how to work, you people," as if we were a category, not individuals. But now, walking past that same house on my own time, as my own person, I felt no shame, only clarity, because that woman would never know my story. Not really, but I knew hers. I knew what it was to raise someone who looked at you like a tool, and that knowledge was power. Back at Julia's, I began helping her with paperwork, translating forms, filling out online applications, organizing her bills. One day she looked at me and said, "You should work at the community center. They need people like you." I laughed at first. "Me?" She said, "You speak 3 languages, have raised a child alone, survived a broken system, and know how to help people who feel invisible. You are exactly what that center needs." That night, I thought about it. I hadn't held a formal job since the injury. I didn't have documents, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way. Maybe I could help from the shadows. Maybe I didn't need a title to serve a purpose. So I returned to the center, this time not just as a volunteer. I sat down with the coordinator, a kind woman named Angela. I told her my story. I told her everything. Her eyes watered. She said, "You don't need papers to make a difference. You just need heart." They gave me a small stipend, a corner desk, a folder labeled with my name, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. One evening, while organizing intake forms, I found one with handwriting I recognized. Pedro, his name. My breath caught in my chest. It was a form for housing assistance. I checked the date. Recent, very recent. The address listed was mine, my old house. I read further. He had listed himself as the sole resident. No dependents, no mention of me. I wasn't shocked, but I was hollow. That night I sat with Julia and told her. She said, "He's still building on top of what you gave him." And that was it. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting the house back. It was about reclaiming my story. Because while he lived in the house, I carried the home in my heart, and there's no title transfer for that. If you are listening and you have ever been left behind in a place you helped create, if someone moved forward by stepping on your back, please leave a comment with the words, "My story matters." And if you want more stories that speak to the silence between pain and healing, subscribe to this channel. Your presence here gives voice to those still searching for their own. Some days, I still catch myself looking toward the old bus stop, half expecting to see Pedro running down the hill like he used to, backpack bouncing, calling out for me. That image lives in a soft part of my memory, untouched by the betrayal that followed. It reminds me that love, no matter how wounded, can leave behind echoes of its truest form. But now I walk different streets. I carry grocery bags to elderly neighbors. I help translate medical appointments. I sit with women who speak more with their eyes than their mouths. These small acts have become my new rhythm. They don't erase what happened. They don't mend the break between mother and son. But they remind me that even when people abandon us, we still have something to give. One morning, as I helped sort canned food at the community pantry, Angela pulled me aside. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the women I'd helped weeks earlier. She wrote, "You made me feel human again." Those words hit me harder than any legal paper ever could, because they weren't about ownership or status. They were about value, They were about worth, and for so long, I forgot I had any. You see, when you spend decades being quiet, working hard, never asking for more than survival, you begin to believe that survival is all you deserve, that keeping your head down is noble, that silence is safety. But silence, I've learned, is also isolation. It becomes a cage you build yourself, bar by invisible bar. So I started speaking more. At church, I stood up during prayer hour and shared my story. My voice shook, my hands trembled. But when I looked up, every eye in the room was filled with tears, and not pity, recognition. One woman whispered, "That's my life too." The next week I was invited to speak again, then again. Soon I was standing in front of classrooms, talking to high school students about immigration, family, sacrifice. Some looked bored, some looked ashamed, but one girl stayed behind after everyone left. She hugged me and said, "I don't talk to my mom, but now I want to try." That hug healed something in me, because even if my own son had walked away, maybe someone else's child would walk back. I started journaling every night, not just to remember, but to release. I wrote about crossing the border, about sleeping on floors, about the first time I saw Pedro read in English and felt pride so deep it made me cry in secret. I wrote about the betrayal, yes, but I also wrote about joy, about resilience, about the quiet power of women who endure. And then something unexpected happened. Angela introduced me to a lawyer, not for Pedro, not to fight for the house, but to explore a pathway for legal residency. I was hesitant. For years, I believed papers were a fantasy, something other people had, not women like me. But the lawyer said that under recent humanitarian policies, there might be a way, that victims of certain abuses, especially by family, could qualify for protection under U visa categories. I was stunned. I never saw myself as a victim. I was just a mother, just someone trying to make it. But sometimes, surviving betrayal means naming it. The process wasn't easy. It took months. Letters of support, testimonies, proof that I had been abused not physically but emotionally, psychologically, through manipulation and control. At first I was embarrassed to even speak it aloud, but as I gathered the evidence, I realized something powerful. My pain had a name, my struggle had weight, my story had value, and just maybe it could open doors, not only for me, but for others like me. During that time, Julia never left my side. She came with me to appointments, held my hand when the memories choked my words. Her kitchen became my sanctuary. Her faith became my shelter. Then, one quiet afternoon, I received a letter, a notice of approval. I was granted deferred action under a humanitarian clause. No, it wasn't a green card, but it was safety. It was recognition. It was the first brick of a new foundation. I sat alone in the bedroom and held the letter to my chest, not because it saved me, but because it honored me. After all these years of hiding, I had been seen. If you have ever felt like your story didn't matter, like your suffering was too quiet to be recognized, please write in the comments, "I exist and I am enough." And if you believe voices like ours deserve to be heard, not hidden, subscribe to this channel. Every story shared here is a light in the dark, and sometimes, one light is enough to guide someone home. After the approval letter arrived, everything around me seemed to carry a different weight. The same street I walked every day to the church now looked brighter, not because the sun had changed, but because something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like a ghost clinging to the edges of someone else's country. I felt like a person again, a woman with a name, a past, and maybe even a future. I carried that letter everywhere for a while, tucked inside my purse, behind a photo of my parents. It wasn't just a document, it was my proof, not just of status, but of endurance, proof that I had been broken, yes, but not erased. At the community center, people began coming to me with their own stories. Women afraid to report abuse, mothers who had been threatened with deportation by their own children or spouses, young girls who didn't know how to translate eviction notices. I helped where I could, sometimes with forms, sometimes just with an open ear. I started leading workshops, quiet at first, just a few women in folding chairs. We shared stories, we cried, we laughed about things that once made us ashamed. I saw their shoulders begin to lift. I saw their eyes stop darting around the room, waiting for something to fall apart. Angela, the director, told me one day, "You are a bridge, not a burden." Those words stayed with me, because for so long, I thought of myself as a weight Pedro had to carry. I blamed myself for becoming too much, staying too long, dreaming too loudly. But now I saw that my dreams were never the problem. The problem was a world that taught us our worth ends where someone else's comfort begins. One afternoon, I sat alone and reread old journals. In one entry, written years ago, I had described a day when Pedro was just 10. He had scraped his knee and came running to me crying. I had wrapped him in a towel, kissed his forehead, and told him he was strong. That pain didn't last forever, that he could heal. Reading those words now, I realized I had once believed them for him. Now it was time to believe them for myself. So I did something I never thought I would do. I returned to the old house, not to reclaim it, but to release it. It was a quiet Sunday. The street was still. I stood across the road and looked at the house that held 20 years of my life. The paint was fading. The garden was overgrown. A window had a crack in it that hadn't been there before. I didn't expect Pedro to be home. I didn't knock. I just stood there, letting the memories wash over me like rain. The Christmas lights we hung too early. The night we slept on the floor with no furniture. The time he ran outside barefoot in the snow, laughing until his lips turned blue. Those memories are mine. He may hold the deed, but I hold the life we lived inside those walls, and that can never be transferred. I turned and walked away, not out of defeat, but peace. Back at the center, we launched a new program, Empowerment for Undocumented Mothers. We called it RACES, which means roots, because even when you are torn from the ground, you can still grow, you can still nourish, you can still hold others steady. I shared my story in a local paper, then on a podcast, then in a panel for immigrant rights. Each time it felt like shedding an old skin. It hurt, but it also healed. Then, months later, something unexpected happened. I received a message, not from Pedro, from his girlfriend. She said she had found my number in his drawer, that she didn't know the full story, but wanted me to know that he had been struggling, that he had lost his job, that the house was at risk of foreclosure, that he never spoke of me, but sometimes sat in silence, looking at an old photo. I thanked her, and that was it. I didn't ask for more. Because healing is not always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about release. Sometimes it's enough to know that your absence is felt, that your silence now holds the power your voice once did not. If you have ever had to let go of someone you loved deeply in order to protect your own soul, share your story below by commenting, "I chose peace." And if this story reminded you of the strength hiding inside your own pain, subscribe to this channel. Every new voice here turns our pain into a collective anthem of survival. Healing doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it arrives with acceptance, the quiet kind, the one that whispers instead of shouts, the one that says, "You did everything you could. Now it's time to rest." I no longer look at my past with bitterness. I used to. I used to sit at Julia's table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring out the window wondering why the son I raised turned into someone I could barely recognize. I used to replay the betrayal like a loop I couldn't turn off, but that loop is fading now. Not because I forgot, but because I forgave myself for staying too long, for loving too hard, for believing that love would be enough. Some scars don't disappear. They just become part of the skin you carry. And mine tells a story of resilience, of a woman who crossed deserts, borders, and betrayals, and still chose compassion. That little house I once called home is no longer mine, but the dream it represented still lives inside me. A safe place, a roof that doesn't leak, a door that doesn't slam in fear, a room filled with warmth even on the coldest nights. I didn't lose that dream. I just had to rebuild it elsewhere, and I did. At the center, we now serve over 50 families, some undocumented, some displaced, some just lost, but each one arrives carrying a story. And when they sit across from me and whisper their fears, I don't just listen, I understand. I see myself in them. And that connection, that shared survival, becomes our strength. I often end our sessions with a question. What would you tell the younger version of yourself, the one who thought she wasn't enough? The answers vary, but mine has always been the same. I would tell her, you were always more than enough. You were never the burden. You were the bridge. I keep that phrase close now, on a sticky note by my bed, on the wall of my office. Sometimes when I feel doubt creeping in, I run my fingers over those words like a prayer. There are still days when the memory of Pedro brings a lump to my throat, not because I want him to come back, but because I wish he had never left in the first place. Left the boy he used to be, left the version of himself that loved me without condition. That part hurts, but it no longer defines me. What defines me now is the work I do, the women I uplift, the peace I carry in my chest like a steady drum. And if you've made it to the end of this story, I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening, for holding space, for bearing witness to a story that was almost silenced. Your presence here means more than you know. It's a reminder that stories like mine don't disappear in the dark. They echo, they rise, they breathe again in the hearts of those who dare to care. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it reminded you of your mother, your abuela, your own struggle, please leave a comment with the words, "I see you, and you are not alone." Every comment is a light, and we need as many lights as we can get. If you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel. Here, we honor the silent fighters, the invisible builders, the mothers who held entire worlds together without anyone ever noticing. This space exists because of people like you. And now, as this story comes to a close, I invite you to keep going. Click the next video that just appeared on your screen. It carries another voice, another soul, another journey that deserves to be heard. Because when one story ends, another begins. And together, they remind us we were never meant to walk this road alone. Thank you for being here. Until next time.